communities are so resilient in general. You know, it's like we do feel like that we are the savior of communities, but to be honest, communities are everyone is emergency manager. And I think one of the biggest thing with the Bhopal gas tragedy was, and I think I question that a lot, is that how little people are aware about it. It has impacted millions of people in Bhopal.
Kia ora e whakoutou, haere mai ki te kōrero, te ara whānui ki te rangi. Ko Oscar toko ingoa, ko tangata tiriti toko iwi, mihi nā tangata whenua o Aotearoa, tihei mauri ora. I'm here today with Voice of Aroha and Pooja. Kia ora, Pooja.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the Climate Podcast. There's so many things that we can chat about, but why don't we start by hearing your story? Where did you come to the climate mahi?
Ooh, so more than climate, I'm actually from the disaster management side of stuff. So I have born and brought up in one of the cities in India called Bhopal, which has faced one of the worst industrial disasters in 1984. It has caused, Union Carbide. A lot of people got impacted by that. And even though I was not born at that time, but I grew up hearing those stories from my parents. So
Wow. Did you say an industrial
disaster?
disaster? Wow. Does that mean the infrastructure broke down?
So what happened was it was a pesticide factory, and there was no proper health and safety, which has been done by the factory owner, who were international, and it leaked what we called methyl isocyanide gas during the night of 2nd and 3rd of December.
Wow.
And because it was cold evening, a lot of cold night, the air remained on ground, which impacted quite a lot of people. They died, they were inhaling, and they were dying on the the road.
So cyanide gas just drifted towards the surface from their factory. That's crazy.
And people were smelling, and a lot of, it was a big impact. And actually you can see what do you call that? On Netflix, what do you call that?
Like a documentary?
Not documentary. It was actually a series called The Railwaymen. Railwaymen, and they have actually made it on specifically on the Bhopal gas tragedy.
Wow.
So search it. It's crazy, and it's actually one of the biggest one, equivalent to Chernobyl.
I was thinking Chernobyl was seems to be a parallel here.
And it was a big one. And I think one of the biggest thing with the Bhopal gas tragedy was, and I think I question that a lot, is that how little people are aware about it. It has impacted millions of people in Bhopal, and we still are not aware about it, especially in this generation. Now we are actually forgetting about what has happened in there, and not a lot of discussion, unlike we do discuss about Chernobyl, but not the third world country which impacted by that. So,
I think that's really interesting. Like, nuclear gets a lot of airtime for being risky, and Chernobyl being a highlighted example of why it's risky.
Yeah.
But I think that's really important to remember that there's other forms of chemical and biohazardous risks.
Absolutely. And I think that was, and if you think about it, like with increasing disasters, and that was like human-induced emergency and disaster, which could have been prevented.
Totally avoidable.
Absolutely. And if the people who were the owners of that factory and responsible for that factory, if they would have just taken care of a little bit of health and safety and all those kind of stuff, this could have been preventable. And I think that's what got me into emergency management and disaster management. That's how they say it in India. And because I was like, there is this preventable side of stuff in disasters, right?
Absolutely.
And there is a disaster because humans are involved. So if that incident would have happened in a barren land, it probably wouldn't have impacted humans, at least, definitely environment. But humans will be safeguarded. But we call disaster because it impacts human, human establishments. And that's what led me to do my master's in disaster management. And I looked into specifically on how social impacts can have a huge, what do you call that in a proper way? Social
cohesion?
No. Social factors.
Okay.
Yeah. Social factors can have quite a lot of impact on disaster and how we actually, on resilience as well, and how we tackle disaster, right? Because historically, when we think about disasters, civil defense, the word which we utilize quite a lot in emergency management space, is very much on that command, control, military that we have to be working on from that hierarchical structure.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like there is a lot more to society and societal and community side of stuff than just that. And that's what made me to do my master's. And
Wow.
yeah.
That's really interesting to hear about your master's, Mahi, and how focusing on the agency that humanity has in these disasters. There's some, for sure, there's parts of natural disasters that are out of our hands, and we have to do what we can to respond to those things. But I think there's also within our agency we have things that we can do to not make it worse or not ask for troubles further down the line.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about, and that's where I see quite a lot of correlation between climate change and emergency management, right? So when you think about how we can mitigate those risks, which we know are going to have a huge impact on our life, how we can make sure that communities are, first of all, aware about where they are living, how those living conditions can impact them. And not only in short term, because we know about the risk all over the world, right? Like wherever you live, wherever is human interaction with the nature, there will be some form of risk, right?
Absolutely.
But being aware about that and not being complacent about it is what it is all about, right?
Absolutely.
Be it emergency management or climate change, and so that's I was also being very lucky to actually worked after Nepal earthquake in 2015.
Oh wow, that was also a pretty big event.
It was a big one, and it does open up. So for me personally, I think I was a very idealistic kid. I'm going to change the world and whatnot. And when I reached to Nepal, the second earthquake happened. So it was, first one was 25th of April. I know the date. Second one was on 12th of May. And we reached there on 11th or 12th of May. And the second earthquake happened and it impacted. I firsthand has an experience of a big earthquake.
Yeah.
And that idealism gone out of the window a little bit because I went there for psychosocial first aid and I realized, oh my God, I need psychosocial support
absolutely.
after that particular earthquake.
Absolutely.
And another thing which I learned after that particular incident was that communities are so resilient in general.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like we do feel like that we are the savior of communities, but to be honest, communities are. Everyone is emergency manager. That's what I feel like. That the way I've seen Nepalese community to just band together, coming together and supporting each other out, making makeshift tent because they knew that now the second big earthquake has happened. It can create a lot of tremors and whatnot.
Yeah.
They started working on their own a lot of in that space. So it was a quite humbling experience, to be honest, as an emergency manager and student of emergency management at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, earthquakes are humbling for sure, as are all of the natural disasters.
Yeah.
And particularly in like Nepal and the Himalayas, that's a particularly active tectonic area.
Yeah.
And avalanches, landslides, like there's some significant there's some serious natural hazards around there.
Yeah.
You made a really interesting point, a lot of really interesting points about like community risk awareness and environmental awareness, both like in their local environments and how that could change. I think that's really important for locals to understand, but also for migrants coming into a new country, is that you're kind of inheriting that climate context.
Absolutely.
And we share earthquakes with the Himalayas, but in a totally different tectonic setting, you know. I think finding our ways to prepare for that and learning from international examples from that is super important for, I think, New Zealand for sure.
I 100% agree. And on the same time, I also feel, from my personal experience, if I could say, when I first came here, I already completed my studies and worked in international relations and emergency management sector for some time before I came here.
Right.
It was still interesting to see how different systems were in New Zealand, how our society interact with each other compared to, so if you, one of the things which my dad always say is that you cannot utilize same answers for different questions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Each question is unique in itself
Needs its own answer.
and needs its own answer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then, of course, you can learn from different questions and different answers which has been already given to you in the
Different
past,
experiences.
right? So why I said that is you're absolutely right. We have earthquake risk. We have some very big risks compared to and very equivalent to some of the nations we see in northern hemisphere,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
However, our society, sorry again, um, our society is quite different compared to.
yeah.
So if I say some of the things which we think about. Community resilience side of stuff, if I talk about when I say the Nepalese community came together, one of the key factor in Nepali community was that they are very well connected community. So people living in one place for years and years and for generations, to be honest, and everyone knows everyone, right? They have that collectivist society when we talk about that, right? However, when we see New Zealand, yes, it is in some part we are very resilient, we are very collectivist, but if you see cities like Wellington, where we know that we are a transient community, people come and go. People come from very different places. Some comes from different region within the country. Some comes from very different country as well.
Yeah.
So having that knowledge about your neighbor or people around you can be very different compared
Yeah,
to. So
absolutely.
solutions which can work for a country like Nepal or India or Thailand or Myanmar may not be the right solutions for a country like Aotearoa, right?
Yeah, or they might be. We just need to communicate that through, you know. We need to know about those lessons and how to apply it in a New Zealand context. I think, yeah, and learning how to understand each other more socially and culturally, I think, and how do we support each other, especially in times of crisis and emergency management.
Absolutely.
is-
And I think that's why knowing your neighbor
Yeah.
becomes the biggest thing
Yeah.
compared to any other thing you can do for preparedness, Going next door, knocking on their door and just introducing yourself can be a big step towards that preparedness than anything else. And that's what we have, that's what we need, and I would say in cities like Wellington, to be honest,
Yeah. You made some really interesting points earlier as well about how resilient the community can be. And I think the community can be especially resilient if you know your neighbor and if you know who your networks are and what skill sets you've got.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming to the first hui that we had in March.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to have you there. And one of the things that we chatted through was the kind of 3 different definitions of community. Like there's your social community, which might not be your most proximate community. And there's your international community, who you may or may not be closely tied to. And then there's your proximate community who you have to engage with if there's an emergency. Like it's those tools that are around you that is your response kit.
Absolutely. And I think that's like those who are next to you is your neighbors, right? And that's what becomes, but then your actual community might be in some different suburbs. So let's take an example of a big Wellington Fault earthquake, 8.2. I, as an Indian, I have some of my friends who literally lives in Newtown, right? Or they live in Wellington City. I live in Lower Hutt. I know Stokes Valley, where I live, may be cut off from a big disaster if it happens.
Well,
we
a lot
know
of
that.
communities are going to be isolated.
And I will be isolated, and communities will be isolated. And my immediate connection point, I may not be able to reach out to them. And that's why it is important to be aware about that circle.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I think quite a lot about it as well. Again, from that because of being an immigrant, my immediate family live, apart from my husband and son, lives in India. So my parents live in India. My in-laws live in India. My cousins live in India.
Yeah, right.
And I know if a big disaster happen, I may not be the first person they will be hearing about the emergency. It will be the news channel, right?
Yeah.
And the thing which scares me most is they will make, even though if situation is very small or big, who knows, but even if it is not that big and I'm okay, they might think that I'm not okay, and that will make it a very anxious period for my family who live in internationally, overseas.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things which I do talk quite a lot, especially when I'm talking to my immigrant friends and people who have their family overseas, is that please have a chat with your family about all the emergency contacts. Tell them about different people phone number. You should not be their only contact in this country.
Yeah.
There should be other people's phone number they should have in their kitty, so that they can reach out to them if they're not able to reach out to you, first of all,
Actually, those communication networks and who do you connect with and how do you touch base and how do you make sure you're all okay? I think that's fascinating, and knowing who those are is really important. We had a communication resilience in civil defence specialist come and chat to us, and he was saying having those international connections can be really important in a local emergency, because if the local channels are overwhelmed, then the international ones can get the message through.
Yeah.
So like maintaining all those networks and touching base with your crew and all those social skills and working together in emergency is super important. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think first of all, that's why we need to be prepared before a
Yeah.
disaster happens. So all of these things is the hindsight, right? We think about it, especially after one of the things which we have seen after Christchurch earthquake was people were trying to call within the city to each other and they were not able to reach each other.
Yeah.
However, when they tried to call to, let's say, Auckland or
Yeah.
other part of the country, they were able to reach out to them, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's quite fascinating and interesting as well, how the communication work and how it is important to have that discussion beforehand with your overseas family, but also with your immediate family about like, okay, what is going to be your pickup space, or where are you going to meet
Yeah.
up spot,
Well,
etc.
here's the plan.
Yeah, here's the plan, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those are quite. It keeps me awake, at times,
Absolutely.
thinking about all of that.
These are huge questions for sure.
Yeah.
And I fully agree with you that the community is really resilient. And I wanna really acknowledge all of those examples internationally where there's been a disaster happen and the community has just absolutely rallied to support each other.
Yeah.
There's like the Nepalese earthquakes, there's the Brisbane floods, there's the Christchurch earthquakes, there's the LA fires, like in all of those situations the community really like band together to support each other. And I think that is a beautiful capacity of humanity. And I think you're also right to say that the success of that response is almost entirely reliant on the preparation before the event. And I think there's so many ways that we can help ourselves further down the line by prepping in advance.
Absolutely, and I think that's where it's links to emergency management, links to climate change as well, is that preparation piece, right?
Absolutely.
Being first of all aware that these are the risks.
Yeah.
Acknowledging those risks.
Big risks.
Real big risks, for not only for one place but for our beautiful earth,
Yeah.
right? And for humanity, to be honest.
Absolutely.
And if we do not take actions now, we know that there will be consequences down the line.
Absolutely.
Maybe even if this generation cannot see it, it will be the future generation who definitely will take it, will see it, right?
The planet is operating on timescales where it's playing the long game.
Yep.
These consequences are going to roll forward and they're going to roll out over time,
Yep.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to know how to best prepare for that where we can, because we're collaborating with a planet that's changing, but there's ways that we know it's changing, and I think that gives us windows of agency to respond to those changes.
Absolutely.
Either we can build systems with those changes in mind, or we can build social supports to help each other prepare for those systems.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the thing I was just thinking about and reading about was the Myanmar earthquake, which has happened recently, right?
Yeah, huge.
And it was a huge one, and it has.
An urban.
Yeah.
A big urban earthquake.
It was an urban earthquake, and it has impacted not only one country but multiple countries, right? And it was so fascinating to see that how the impact of that disaster was different in different places, right? Even though it has a huge, so Thailand in Bangkok, a lot of people experienced and felt the earthquake.
Yeah.
But the consequences or impact of that earthquake was not as severe as Myanmar has seen.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
one of the big reason for it, you know what was that, Oscar? It was actually Myanmar has a very strict code of building.
Oh, right.
Yeah, building codes. And
Great.
yeah, and that's like, that is so fascinating, right? And just they have started thinking about making proper building codes for
Yeah.
building, keeping in mind that big earthquake can has a huge impact, and it's like it takes almost 1 or 1.5 years to get permit to build a
Wow. That's
building
great
over
that
there.
their structures are so like rigorous that they've got those preparations in place.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. Like there's so many ways that we can prepare. Like even in how we build the buildings.
Yes.
Like we can point to Japan as another culture and country that has earthquake resilient infrastructure, you know? Like they know it's part of their landscape and they've adapted to those changes.
Yeah, and also has this huge awareness among communities as well, that oh, they have to, and especially after. So again, fascinatingly, I was reading another article around the Japan earthquake. Kobe earthquake was one of
Oh,
the big
right.
one, which happened in 1995,
Yeah,
94,
right.
95, if I'm right. And then after Kobe, the next big earthquake was in 2011, just like, which has a huge impact on Japanese population. And it was fascinating that between 1995 Kobe earthquake to 2011 earthquake, which happened in Japan, the preparedness measures declined a little bit.
Oh, true.
Yes.
Interesting.
And it is so fascinating because
Interesting.
people started to feel that, oh, that happened, now I'm.
The pressure's been released. It's
Yeah,
not going to
that
happen
it's
for
not
another
going to
100 years or so.
And then 2011 earthquake happened, and then the preparation measures went up again. Sorry,
Yeah.
they went up again.
Right.
If I'm
After the
saying it right.
2011
Yes,
earthquake.
yeah.
That was a pretty big one for
It was a
Japan,
big
right?
one
That
for
caused
them.
That caused the nuclear disaster and the
And tsunami
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
Yep. And that is also quite fascinating to see how community perception of emergency and the preparedness measures they take
I
can
think
have
that
a huge impact on
is
it as well.
fascinating. Like
Yeah.
learning those lessons to actually make it a priority because like otherwise it's kind of not a priority. We when I was 2, we were living in Brunei and they have regular forest fires. Like they just light the hillside on fire and like everyone is like coughing and like there's major health issues around, but everyone's like, nah, the fire's not an issue, it's fine, we're totally fine. And it's like that cognitive dissonance I think is really challenging.
Yeah.
I think Japan's also an interesting example of like having had that time to prepare. They've put in some pretty serious mitigation efforts.
Absolutely.
Like the tsunami warning system, the earthquake warning system, like their comms go out straight away.
100%. And now they're like getting, because they know how those risks can have a huge impact, and communities know now because they have, it is like, it's not for this generation which is growing up, then they have experienced that, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's why they want to put their money where their mouth is, right?
Yeah.
And putting those emphasis on preparedness. But it's sometimes it is unfortunate, if you say, like, sometimes you need that shaking to make people like, these are real issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like Christchurch is a real example of that, where like it's had a really big impact on the people. Like they like there was a lot of people who hadn't really experienced an earthquake, and then there was a massive earthquake, and they're still recovering from the impacts of that earthquake. And I think it does. Yeah, once we waken up to those how high the stakes are, I think it really does kick in some response, because the only way we get through this is together.
Yeah, and I think that was same thing which happened for us as well here in Aotearoa. So again, like what I have learned after coming here, I've just came here 6 years ago, but like since 1933, so the Nelson earthquake, which happened in 1933, and since then until 2011, New Zealand didn't faced any big earthquake during that period.
Yeah.
So a lot of we became complacent, right? That, it probably won't happen to us and we should not.
And it's such a hard thing to predict, because like any time between now and the next couple of 100 years is like, how much do we prepare for that risk?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reason why this communication and Kōrero needs to happen constantly.
Absolutely.
Even when we know that we are not seeing the like, quotes and quotes risk, or like we haven't seen any big emergency. So one of the things which you have seen after Cyclone Gabriel, right? 100-year flood, that people started to talk about, 100-year flood. It's not that it's going to happen once every 100 years. 100-year floods can happen.
With increasing frequency.
There you go. And that's why these communication is, these Kōrero and discussions are so important in this time when we are not in any active disaster at this moment.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. Like, sea level rise is such a good example of like something that is already baked into the system. That change, whether it's happening now or it's going to keep coming, like that is a change that we need to expect. Like the tools to respond and to chat it all through, I think we need to keep those comms lines as open as possible, especially in terms of the if we need to change our city, or if we need to migrate, or if we need to mitigate or adapt or innovate, then how do we do that? And like from here, what is our point B, and what does that look like, and how do we get there? I think we need everybody as part of that conversation, because that's the future of Aotearoa.
Yeah. And also like thinking about it, like what we are seeing globally is our population is increasing. There will be humans. One thing which humans always done is migrating from one place to another. And we know that will keep happening. That's part of who humans are, right? The Homo sapiens.
Absolutely.
And we know that like this is targeted. We already know Wellington will have 30,000 more people living in next 20 or 30 years, right? And that's like estimated from 5 years ago. Numbers might have changed for now, but we know that the population will increase in our little country as well. So how we are managing those? If we talk about migrating as well, like where exactly are we? Like,
where
what are we
and how and who,
right?
and who makes those decisions, and what happens once we get there? Like all of those things we need to chat those through, because I also hear a lot what you're saying, that like during emergency time is one thing, but we have time during peacetime to prepare for that, and how those two responses change, I think also needs to be made way more explicit or chat through. Like when we do go from peacetime to emergency time, like how does our social license change? How do we support our community, and how does the insurance claims change? Like we need to respond now and sort out the money later, but like how do we do that? All of those sorts of pre, during, and post disaster preparations, I think, are really important.
Absolutely. And one of the things which I've learned recently is New Zealand is one of the only countries actually provide natural disaster insurance support.
Wow.
I know, right? It's so fascinating.
It's very interesting. That must be a declining industry.
One of the things why it is good for us, because we know that our risks are huge. And if we wouldn't have that support from government side of stuff, or the policy side of stuff, our insurance premium would be so huge that normal individual and normal people like you and me won't be able to. We won't be able to pay, and then it's like it's big risk to take care of as well.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things about that in the New Zealand context, like paying the insurance cost to be climate resilient is an enormous cost to inherit. That's really high. But we also need to be prepared, because there was a report that came out after Cyclone Gabriel that was saying New Zealand can't really handle more than one disaster at a time. We need to find ways to invest in our social infrastructure, or develop those skill sets and toolkits, and go get civil defense training. Whatever you can do. Haere mai, we need you on board,
But then also believing in community,
Absolutely.
and trusting the community, and not making the system siloed, or just system not talking to each other.
We need to interconnect.
We have to interconnect, and we need to trust people, because we all have skills. And that's why I will go back to the word which I use. We all are emergency managers. We have skills, different skills, even within this room, which can help and support. So for example, one of the example which my boss likes to use quite a lot, and I'm just going to borrow it, is that when let's say your tire got puncture in the car, what are the steps you're going to take to to mitigate that.
Yeah.
There are a number of things you will do. Probably call AA. You will probably check if it is working hour. You will do XYZ thing, right?
Yeah.
And you will mitigate the issue in hand.
Yeah.
That makes you an emergency manager.
Yeah,
You have
absolutely.
mitigated emergency right now.
Absolutely.
And every single day, us human deal with a lot of emergency. And it's not only this generation or at this stage in time. Ancient human did
Absolutely.
that, right? And that's why we are
acute problem solvers.
we are, right? So believing in that, and I think that's one of the things which we are not doing well is having the trust in human, and making each and every one of our community part of the conversation and discussion, and having more and more, and not making discussion siloed. I'm sorry again. I'm just keep on touching this thing.
It's all good. I totally agree that like between all of our skill sets and all of our communities, we have all of the answers that we need to respond to this.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about climate and civil defense and emergency management is that it's not one person is going to save all of us,
Nope.
but between all of us, we can cover all of our bases.
Yes.
And it's a matter of how do we align what we can do to what's needed.
Absolutely. Oh, that's like what very beautifully put forward. Like, yeah, I 100% totoko that we need to all come onto the table.
Yeah.
And at least have different perspectives seen. So, of course, not my perspective of my alone will not be, even though I have so when I say my, what I mean is that even if you are a person who have worked in this particular field for ages and ages, there can be someone who is novice can bring quite a lot of amazing input in that particular Kōrero and discussions. And I think we need to bring all of that together.
Absolutely. I think it's through everyone's experience that we cover all of our bases.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think there's so many things that we could chat about, and I'm so keen to keep chatting about them. Unfortunately, this is all we've got time for this episode, but we'd love to have you back next time. And one of our rituals at Voice of Aroha is we have a book from all of our guests, and we've got a question for you before we wrap up the episode. And they're asking you, what do you think is the single most important issue of climate adaptation facing New Zealanders today?
I think there are quite a lot of issues, to be honest.
That's a big one.
It is a big one, right? I think the single... Oh, God, I don't even know how to answer that question. I think one of the things which I feel is the risk appetite of people, policymaker, community. Aotearoa is doing quite well compared to all other countries, if I can say, and especially the places where I have worked in the past. I would say, especially in the climate change space. But I also feel that. Again, it's the same thing which I talk about disasters and emergencies as well, is that we drop the ball when we do not see the impacts which are happening, which are being created because of XYZ, and people tend to concentrate on stuff which impacting them in very closest vicinity, like money or cost of living or all of those stuff, and then we do drop the ball on stuff which are
those bigger risks outside of our personal sphere.
Yeah, and which we are probably not able to comprehend or see, and it's and I think that's what I see is one of the biggest issue. We do tend to drop balls onto stuff which we cannot comprehend in our current sphere,
Absolutely. We can only act as far as we can see, and we don't see the whole picture.
No. And I think a lot of time it's also, it's not going to impact me. Why I should be bothered? What impacting me right now is I don't have food in my
complacency
table.
And scale.
Yeah. Because, humans are very short-sighted.
That's true. That's true. And climate is a really weird problem for us to respond to, because it's on a really large scale, it's on a really long scale, it's on a global scale, and it's really hard for us to see all of those interactions.
Yeah, because if I don't have food on my table today, why would I think about what if if something bad happens, I'll have. So this is example from emergency management, right? And one of the things which we constantly deal with is people thinking, why would I save now when I have to
No, I need
think-
to spend that money to eat.
eat right now,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm paid to paycheck right now. Why I should be my each individual have their own span of concentration, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
you can only you can concentrate on this many things, not like thousand, and that's why I say that you do tend to drop ball on
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
which
yeah.
you are not visibly able to see. I hope I've answered it properly.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No,
It's
I think
like
that's fair enough. I think there is quite a lot of issues that New Zealanders currently face with climate adaptation. I think that complacency and also not fully knowing which scale to act and how big is the big picture and how much of it we can actually see.
And also being reactive and proactive is a big thing as well. If you think like we are historically, and when I say we, I don't only mean New Zealand, but I mean in general, and it's global issue. Okay,
Yeah.
we have been quite reactive into to a lot of these issues. Like when it happens, we'll deal with it when it happens, rather
Absolutely.
than being very proactive and mitigating.
Avoiding it in the first place, we tend to deal with it once it happens.
Yeah.
That's
And-
very interesting. We've got so many things we could chat about and so many more things to chat
Yeah.
about. I'd love to keep chatting to them with you about all of these things on our next session. I'd be so keen to have you back on the podcast. But that's everything we've got time for today. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be keen to hear your comments in the comment section. Thanks so much.